All right, so now we're towards the end of the book here, and we're in estate planning. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about retirement and estate planning, and we've certainly touched on an awful lot of these items already in other chapters. One of them is you have plenty of time to start saving for retirement. We've looked at time value of money, we've looked at investing, and we know that that just isn't true. If we get really close to retirement, the math makes it nearly impossible to get to where we want to go. The other thing that I've heard all the time is I can only save a little bit, so it really doesn't matter. That cannot be farther from the truth, because the hardest dollar you will ever save in your life is the first dollar that you're going to save. And when you start saving, there's just a big mental shift from spending to saving. So even if you can only save $50 a month, right? You get your job, you can only save $50 a month, and you're saying, well, I might as well not even save 50 because it adds up to 600. That doesn't really matter. No, save the 50, because it's $50 this year, and then you get into the habit. Next year you save 150, and the year after that it's 200, and the year after that it's 2.25, and then it's 275. And so you need to get the ball rolling. None of us has laying around with nothing to do an extra $500 a month. It all gets spent. And so all of us are going to start at very small increments and then work our way up. All right? One of the other ones is you'll spend less money when you retire. For some people that's true. For an awful lot of people it's not. In fact, most people tend to spend a lot more money their first 5 years into retirement. And this kind of happened to me already, so I could really see how this happens. When I switched from private industry to teaching, one of the great things that comes with that is summers off. And so I set up my summer budget for 3 months because I'm going to be off. And next thing you know, I had run through the entire budget in 5 weeks. Why? Because I had nothing to do. I wasn't going to work 40 hours. I didn't have to be in bed at 10 o'clock so I could be up at 5 so I could get to work on time. I'd get up around 8 o'clock. I'd go with my wife to breakfast, and we'd go to a movie, or we'd go down to the beach, or I would get a great midweek deal on a hotel, either in San Francisco or Palm Springs, and next thing you know, we're off to San Francisco, Palm Springs, San Diego, or wherever else semi-locally, right? Not a huge trip. But all of a sudden, you start spending all that money because you're out doing stuff and having fun. Even if I'm not out spending $6,000 on that, $5,000 on this, next thing you know, a $100 hotel room that was normally $225, and we spend a couple nights, eat out a couple good dinners, and you blow your budget. So do not count on that, because you'll spend approximately 70% of your current income in retirement. In my opinion, that cannot be farther from the truth. My estimates is probably the first 5 years after I retire, I'll probably be spending 120 to 150% of my current spending. And why is that? I can end up going to a lot of movies, I'll go on a lot of short vacations, might go on a couple long vacations. There'll be a lot more fun things to do. All right, one of the other things is you can depend on Social Security and pensions to cover your basic living. First off, Social Security was never meant to be your retirement plan. When Social Security started out, Social Security was an anti-poverty program. In fact, Social Security started paying people at age 65 because half of the people had passed away by the time they hit 65. So under the system, you would survive usually about 10 years in retirement. People retired at age 55, and then you were responsible for 10 years of savings. And if you went beyond the average survival age, then Social Security would pick up. And so if you're counting on Social Security to do everything, you're probably in trouble. If you're under 40, I would not count on Social Security for anything. At my age, getting closer to 50. Personally, I'm counting on Social Security to pay for one great night out once or twice a month, so that if Social Security's there, then it's just gravy. If it's not, I'm not going to miss it. Because given the pure mathematics behind Social Security, it cannot survive in its current form when all of us baby boomers and the baby bust generation is in its final 10 years high earning peak period. The math is going to have it fall apart. The same as the coming financial crisis that happened in real estate. That was also, quite frankly, a mathematical certainty that was going to melt down. All right, so this we've seen several times, the importance of starting early, and people saying, hey, a small amount doesn't matter. Right here, if you save about $125 a month, not necessarily a great amount of money to come up with, you're going to end up with about $1 million at retirement. If you wait till age 50, you're going to need about $2,250 to get to approximately the same place. And at the age 50, you never have extra money laying around. So now when you're 50, maybe you're helping support your parents. Maybe you have 2 or 3 kids in college. You're buying cars. You want to go on vacation. You bought a house and you want to fix up the house, or you want to move to a bigger house. You never have a bunch of extra money laying around. And so if you wait till you hit 50, 55, the math is going to make it nearly impossible to reach the goals that you want. So a small amount of money starting early, absolutely nothing wrong with that. These, counting your assets and figuring out your net worth, we've covered in other chapters. But remember, when you retire or when you get sick, you eat net worth. Right? You've got your assets minus all your liabilities equals net worth. And ideally, certainly your net worth should increase every single year. It doesn't necessarily increase every year, but you should be able to plot it over several years and see a trend. So with the downturn in real estate and downturn in some of my investments, certainly my net worth suffered for 2 or 3 years. Then real estate's recovered a bit, the stock market's recovered, and my net worth is back up. Okay? On housing, for a lot of people, owning their house is probably going to be their single greatest asset. In my opinion, it should be your number 2 greatest asset. Hopefully, your retirement funds are worth more than your house. If they are, you've probably done pretty well. Plus, we want our house to be paid off. Because at least I know when I hit retirement, I don't have a mortgage, I can put that money somewhere else. That is a very important goal. Some people look at it and say, wow, a paid off house? That's unrealistic. That doesn't work. You should put that money somewhere else. All right? I don't agree with that at all. If you look at how our grandparents did and our great-grandparents, their retirements were much, much more stable. They tended to stay in their houses longer. They tended to have houses that were slightly smaller than they probably could afford, but they were paid off. And that gives them a lot of peace of mind, especially if you start outliving your assets. Average person now is going to live to about the age 84. So if you retire at 65, you're looking at a solid 20 years in retirement. But that's average. My grandmother lived to 97. There's new technologies for targeting cancer, new technologies for MRIs, less invasive, more efficient surgeries. We are living longer and longer and longer. And if you've taken good care of yourself, 105 is not unrealistic for someone in their 50s to be planning on living until. So for me, I'm counting on living to about 105. Hopefully I'll have enough assets to carry me there. If I've got my paid off house, then what I can do is do a reverse mortgage. Hopefully I'm not doing a reverse mortgage until I've hit 85, 90, 95. The reverse mortgage should not be the plan. I hit retirement, I'm 65, I reverse mortgage my house. The reverse mortgage, they're expensive, they tie you into that house, there's a lot of things going on, but it's a phenomenal tool that you can use. So use that tool and plan on using that tool when you hit 90, not when you hit 67. A lot of other people go into retirement planning on selling their house. And usually it looks as one or two different things. They're going to sell their house and buy in the same area a much smaller house. Or they're going to sell from, say, Southern California here, and they're going to move to Texas or move to Florida or move to Arizona. Most people who plan on retiring, selling their house, and pulling equity out of their house actually tend not to do that. And the reason they tend not to do that is if you've been in the same house for 20, 25 years, you like your neighbors. You don't want to lose your neighbors. You don't want to lose all those connections. And so they stay in their house. People also tend not to move to Arizona or Florida because they're going to leave all their family behind, because they want to see the grandkids. They want to go to baseball games with the grandkids. They want to see all their friends. They're tied into their church, other community groups, whether it's playing golf with 5 or 6 buddies. They don't want to give all of that up and start over and move to a place where they know no one. So be careful on counting the equity in your house as what you're going to tap for retirement. That tends to not be a quote-unquote safe alternative. Some of the other things we need to do here is we need to look at our life insurance. Usually if you have enough money to retire, you no longer need life insurance. Or maybe you do need life insurance. One of the most common reasons that people keep life insurance in retirement is that the pension is tied to one of the two spouses. And if that spouse dies, the pension is gone. And so the family's living off the pension. And if the wife is getting the pension and the wife passes away, that's going to leave the husband with no money, and they won't be able to support themselves. So we'll maintain life insurance on the wife, so if she passes, there's enough funds to carry forward the other spouse. We also want to look at, all the other investments that may or may not be growing, our 401k, our IRAs, et cetera, et cetera. So when we're estimating retirement living expenses, right, we had talked about this, that some of the formulas say that you're only going to need 70% of your current income. For me, I'm thinking I'm going to need 150% of my current income because I plan on having a lot of fun in retirement. So some of the things that go down, right, you tend not to be saving for retirement when you're in retirement. You don't have work expenses, less clothing expenses, although I'm thinking that maybe my golf shirts are going to go up because I'll wear them out because I'll golf a lot more. Housing tends to go down, especially if it's paid off. And people tend to retire to less income, so taxes tend to go down. Although they don't always go down, because if you have a pension and Social Security and other investments equal to about what your income is, and you start drawing on those, you'll be in the exact same place for taxes. So what are some things that are going to go up? Life insurance, if you need to maintain it, certainly is a heck of a lot more expensive for someone who's 70 than someone who's 50, and it's more expensive for someone who's 50 than someone who's 30. So that might go up. Medical expenses could quite possibly go up. A lot of people are going to retire from really good medical plans at their work to Medicare, Medicaid, which might cover less. Some instances it actually even covers more. But as we get older, we tend to need more medications, more coverage. We tend to then end up on medications that maybe aren't covered, and so we got to purchase those. We visit the doctor more often, so we have more co-pays. So these things tend to go up. Certainly, expenses in leisure, you got more time, so you might travel, and you might be giving more gifts to the church, to kids. You might be in a situation where your grandchildren are in college, and so you want to help them along so they don't have as much debt. Right? A lot of things can go up. And you need to look at these situations individually for you, because these are going to be all over the board for different people. All right, so how does the average household spend their money? And so if we look here, for most people, housing is still one of the largest components. If we can get that down to a point that we have a paid-off house when we retire, wow, that is then a huge portion of expenses that are gone. That'll maybe drop from 33% down to 8%, 10%, and that can give us a lot of flexibility and a lot of security. Because if our house isn't paid off versus renting, rent's going to keep going up year after year after year after year, whereas our house, if it's paid off, we don't have a payment that goes up. So we want to end up there. Okay, now we're going to look at two different types of retirement plans. There's two overreaching types. One is called a defined contribution plan. The other type is what's called a defined benefit program. So a defined contribution, what does that mean? That means we're going to open up an account. We're going to deposit into that account a specified dollar amount. Maybe it's 5% of our income, 10% of our income, $500 a month. And there's lots of things that we could do. It could be part of our pension. We could have a stock bonus plan where an employer has your individual account, and at the end of every year, depending on profits, they will deposit stock, a specific amount of stock, into an account for you. Or profit sharing. They're going to put a specific dollar amount set aside for you. So after 25, 35 years, when you retire, in a defined contribution plan, we have no idea how much money you're going to pull out. Because if you're in a stock plan, the stock might be up 200%, it might be down, it might be somewhere in between, and so we don't know how much money you're going to end up with, but what we're going to do is try to make our best guess, and we're going to define how much money we're going to deposit every single year, and then the rate of return within that fund is the rate of return. These are very, very popular under like 401k type programs because employers tend not to build up liabilities, which is one of the things that happens in a defined contribution plan. So employers tend to like defined contribution plans because we do not build up the liabilities that we have in a defined benefit program. So what's a defined benefit program? Well, the employer figures out how much money they think they need to deposit into an account. You don't see that money. What you're going to do is you're going to retire based on some formula. So the formula might be you're going to get 3% of your income for every year you're at the employer. So if you're the employer for 30 years, 3% per year is 90%. If you made $100,000, you're going to get $90,000 a year. We figure out a formula, we define the benefit. The employer decides how much they need to deposit every single year to have enough money set aside to pay for that. If you're getting 2% per year, if you're there 30 years, 2 times 30 is 60. If you made $100,000 as your base, then you're going to get $60,000 a year in retirement. The money may or may not be there. This is one of the biggest problems right now with an awful lot of large corporations that have defined benefit programs. Those programs are underfunded. So in other words, they're short on the amount of money that needs to be in the account. Because the employer deposits money, the value of that money goes up and down. They might end up overfunded, underfunded, about right, but no matter what, the benefit's been defined. And so if the company's short, they have to make up that money. On a defined contribution plan, they fund the retirement that year. Whatever they agreed upon, whatever amount goes into that fund, then it's up for the individuals to manage it, and however much they end up with in the future, they end up with. So, under defined benefit programs, right now, we are also really struggling in the public sector. An awful lot of public sector funds are only 30, 40, or 50% funded. There are trillions of dollars of underfunded liabilities. And businesses want to get away from these. That's why businesses are dropping defined benefit programs as fast as they can and going towards defined contribution plans. Along with your retirement plans at your work and Social Security, we also have what are called personal retirement accounts. Personal retirement accounts are retirement accounts that you fund on your own. It's not part of your employer. It's not part of the government. You contact Fidelity directly, Vanguard, or another investment house, and you deposit money individually into them. Now, there are lots of different types of them. The most common one is what's called the traditional IRA, or the traditional individual retirement account, which allows you to put $5,000 a year into that account. It adjusts for inflation, and so actually right now it's above $5,000. The contributions are also tax deductible. So if I put $5,000 into the account and I've got a 20% marginal tax rate on that $5,000, then I'm going to get back 20% of that off my taxes. I'm going to get back $1,000. So there is a tax reason to do this, and it's to try to encourage people to save. Because when we get to retirement, it's in nobody's best interest that we end up with a citizenry that's broke, right? We want individuals to get to retirement well-funded with a good life, and they're going to go, and not only are they going to be happy and productive, but they're going to buy a lot of stuff and travel and help support the economy at the same time. If you get into an individual retirement account, different than just a savings account, you go down to Wells Fargo, open it up, deposit $1,000, you can take it in, take it out, take it in, take it out. If you're going to put it into a tax-deferred account, there are a lot of rules. And one of those rules is, hey, we'll give you a break on your taxes, but this is set aside for retirement. If you pull it out early, we are going to tax you. And typically you are taxed very heavily. Not only do you pay federal income tax and state income taxes that you would have to pay anyways, but there's going to be a state penalty, a federal penalty, and it is very common that if you pull $10,000 out of your retirement account early, you might pay $5,000 to $6,000 in taxes and penalties. And that's a big hammer, and it's there for a reason. We don't want you to pull out that money. If you have some emergencies, there are some adjustments to this. If you're going to lose your home, you're allowed to pull that money out to save your house. If you have huge medical expenses, you can pull that money out for medical expenses. But for the most part, they want that set aside, and they want it to last to retirement. When we look at the traditional IRA, what we have there is we deposited $5,000, and we got a tax break today. A Roth IRA is slightly different. A Roth IRA, you get no tax deduction today. However, that money grows, and you're not taxed on it again. So I don't get that $5,000 write-off that generates me a $1,000 tax refund. I don't get that $1,000. However, when I pull the money out, I get to pull it out tax-free. And so I'm going to go to the board, and I'm going to kind of show you roughly how that works. Okay, so what's this difference between a regular IRA and a Roth IRA? Now, Uncle Sam is going to get his taxes, and Uncle Sam is going to demand taxes at some point in time. And so when you look at the difference between a regular IRA and a Roth IRA, really it's the timing of when you pay taxes. So with a regular IRA, you're going to deposit, let's say, $5,000 into this fund. When you deposit $5,000 into this fund, you get $1,000 off your taxes. If over time this account doubles, so now it's worth $10,000, and you retire, you're going to retire with $10,000. You're going to pull that money out, and then you're taxed here in retirement. So if we're keeping the tax rates the same, we're at a 20% tax over here, you're going to get $1,000 off your taxes now, and you're going to pay 20% in taxes or $2,000 in taxes, netting you $8,000 in retirement. Under a Roth IRA, you take your $5,000 and you do not get a tax break on this money immediately, which means I earned this $5,000, I pay taxes on this $5,000, so I deposit the full $5,000, and let's say same thing, it grows to $10,000. When I pull this $10,000 out, I pay 0 taxes, and I keep the full $10,000. And so what this kind of comes down to is a couple questions. One, do you really need this $1,000 now? Because if you don't, by using a Roth IRA, you can actually fund a greater purchasing power, because this is after-tax dollars. You've got greater purchasing power in after-tax dollars than you have pre-tax dollars. The other consideration is, am I going to retire to a much higher or a much lower tax rate? And so if you think you're going to be in a much higher tax rate now, then you want to take the deduction now, because you're in a high tax rate, so you get a lot off your taxes, and you think you're going to retire to a lower tax rate. In my opinion, especially if you're young, tax rates to support the government in the direction that we're going with universal health care and a whole bunch of other stuff, I think taxes are going to be higher. And so what I do is I fund my Roth IRA. I do not take a tax deduction now, and then I get to fund it with after-tax dollars. So if I'm over here and my tax rate's higher, I'm not paying additional taxes. And so you can have a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA at the same time. The income limits apply to both. You can only put in a certain amount of money in both accounts. I can't fund an IRA for $5,000 and a Roth for $5,000, but I can fund an IRA at $2,500 and a Roth at $2,500. And there's different flexibilities that are in this. And so certainly as you read and go through this, you can see some of the advantages and disadvantages to this. A lot of people who are in businesses whose income goes way up, way down, way up, way down, when they make a lot of money and they're in a high tax bracket, they deposit money into their individual IRA account, their standard one, so they can take the tax deduction. When times aren't going well and they didn't make a lot of money that year and their income is low, which means their taxes are low and their tax rate's low, well, that's the year that they then fund the Roth IRA, because the savings on their money is going to be much less because their income was low that year. Or maybe you have a lot of write-offs for health care, or your house got destroyed in a natural disaster, or something else like that that gives you a lot of write-offs, then the Roth might make sense because the upfront tax savings is going to be low. One of the other items to consider when you're retiring are annuities. Annuities give you a guaranteed payment every month or every year for as long as you live, or some of the annuities maybe are only guaranteed for 20 years or 30 years, right? They're all over the place and flexible. Annuities, I think, serve a good purpose in an overall plan. You should not take all of your retirement, convert it to an annuity, and then collect that one stream forever, because inflation will tend to eat that thing alive. In my opinion, if you want to have something very stable as part of your portfolio, maybe you convert 20% of your retirement to an annuity, And then you get, along with Social Security, you get another even portion that you're going to be able to count on. If you can take half of your assets, convert half of your assets to an annuity, and you can live off that annuity for at least 7 years, then it makes sense. You're going to convert 50% of your assets, you're going to live off that annuity for 7 years, then the other 50% you're going to have in a diversified stock portfolio, and it's going to grow over the next 7 years. So then when you get to 7 years and inflation has hit the point that that annuity which you purchased that's going to go on hopefully for the rest of your life isn't enough money, you've lost purchasing power, you then have more assets that you can either start drawing upon or you can convert some more of that money to an annuity, and hopefully that'll be another 7, 8 years, and you continue this process. But under very limited circumstances, should you ever take most or all of your retirement assets and convert them into annuities that are not adjusted for inflation. If you end up living 15, 20, 30 years, the purchasing power of that annuity is going to be so small that you're not going to be able to get by. And so with retirements, they're going to last 30 years. We still need growth to beat inflation while we're retired. If we were just going to retire and die in 4 years, then who really cares about inflation? But we can easily live 40 in retirement. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about estate planning. All right? Estate planning is not fun. Planning your own death is not a fun thing to do. But life goes on. There are certain things we want to happen to our assets. There's an old saying that the graveyard is full of irreplaceable men and women. And so we are going to die, and our affairs need to be taken care of. So we need to have this in place, and we need to have a will. If you do not have a will, the state has prepared one for you. So we all have a will. Now, if you write your own, that will supersede the will the state has written for you. One of my friends, in fact, he's not my friend anymore, really, because of what him and his brother did, but his dad passed away without a will. And the state says that if you die and you're married with 2 kids, half of the assets go to the wife, half of the assets go to the kids. And so they had a house that was worth about $800,000. It's a community property state, so half the house is the wife, half the house is now the kids. So an $800,000 house, she gets $400,000. The father's portion was $400,000. Half goes to the wife, $200,000. Half went to the children, $200,000. The mom did not have $200,000 laying around to pay these kids off. And because she wasn't working, she didn't qualify for a loan. And so they made her sell the house to cash them out their $200,000. Plus half of all the other assets they got. So they got a portion of his pension. They got a portion of all the other investment assets. And so what they did was very deplorable. I think that more likely than not, their dad was rolling over in their grave. But if you do not do any planning, this is the type of thing that could happen. You then end up with fights going back and forth. So if we're going to do this, right, if we're married, we want to consider the spouse's needs. What are they going to need? Do we want to leave money to children? Or do we want to make sure your spouse is taken care of? What documents do you need to have available if you die? So I actually have a binder that's sitting in my safe at home. That's the If I Die binder. And it has my will. It has the location of all the assets. It also has in there some of the passwords to some of my accounts. It has the location of my safe deposit box. We had a great uncle that passed away, and we knew he had 2 safe deposit boxes, but we had no idea where those safe deposit boxes were. It took almost a year and a half to find those safety deposit boxes. And because he had a very old will, probate we couldn't close because they didn't know if there was another will that superseded that one. I mean, it was just a mess. If somehow they would have organized, hey, here's where everything is, we could have accessed that much, much easier. So some of the legal documents that we need to have together in this, right? And you should have all of these items somewhere in your house anyways, a central location to find all these things, right? Birth certificates, military service records so that your children can get pensions or your kids can access governmental benefits for your services, where the safe deposit boxes are, automobile registrations, pink slips so that automobiles can be sold or they can get access to that information. That's all really, really important stuff. Titles to stock certificates and other ownership. Even if you do not have the actual certificate, you need some copies of something so that people can follow that paper trail. That is very, very important. All right, so let's look at different types of wills, right? And what is a will, right? It's a legal declaration of a person's mind and basically what he wants to have happen to everything. Attorneys can draft wills. You can draft your own will. Most wills cost $300 to $400 that aren't very complex. If you have situations that are really complex and businesses and lots of assets and real estate investments, then certainly wills can end up being $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to write. But for most of us, where you have a job and a part-time job, you have a car, you have your house or you're renting, you got a bunch of personal assets and a car, it's not very difficult. So some of the first types of wills is a simple I love you will, which in my friend's case, so that he wouldn't have forced his mom to sell the house, would have been very simple if the dad sat down and wrote out an I love you will of what his wishes were and leaving everything to his spouse and sign it. Usually when you're signing documents like that, a holographic written will, you want witnesses. Now, when I wrote my will, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, we use a computer program, but at the end of all the documents, I signed and then we had two witnesses. Your witnesses do not have to read your will and attest to what's inside the will. What they are attesting to is that you said, this is my will right here, and they watch you sign it, and they're just attesting that that's your signature. They don't have to read it. One of the other reasons that a lot of people don't do wills is they say, well, you know what do we do with the kids? Right? Do we give the kids to your parents, to my parents? I don't really like my parents, and so therefore I want to give them to an uncle, and on, so they don't write it. Well, with that, I just say, you can write your will, and if you think the best place for your kids is with an uncle, then leave custody with that uncle. You don't have to go back to your parents and say, oh, by the way, we wrote our will, and you're not getting the kids because we think you're too old, we think you're mean, we think you don't eat well, whatever the reason is. The kids don't like you, right? And if there's a big argument who the kids are going to go with, right? Your family or your spouse's family, you pick and you lie to both of them. And you tell that side of the family they're getting the kids. And the other side of the family, they're getting the kids. The most important thing is that you figure out the best place for your kids if you die. Why go through the massive argument when odds are you won't die anyways? And why cause all that upheaval? But worse would be to not write a will. Something happens, and now comes the huge, massive, expensive, sometimes spiteful fights of who is going to get custody of the children. That can get very nasty and very expensive, and you don't want to leave that as a legacy to your family either. So you got to write a will. All right. So we're going to look at a couple different types of wills. One is the holographic will. Mentioned that a little bit. Typically, you'll write, date, and sign it. It's in your own handwriting, and typically it's used for one of two types of wills. Either I leave everything to my spouse, or wills that are very simple and not a lot of assets. If your estate is worth $3, $4, $5 million, a holographic will probably is not going to stand up, especially if that holographic will is very simplistic. One place that holographic wills stand up, especially if you're making changes to the will, is in a military situation. If someone is in the active military and they're getting ready to be deployed and they write a holographic will, the courts really consider those things strongly and tend not to set those things aside. All right? A formal will is a will that's going to be prepared with an attorney. Might cost $300, $500, or $1,000. Unless it's really complex, you probably shouldn't be over $750. There are attorneys that specialize in wills, and so maybe it'll even be cheaper. They'll probably give you a big packet of things to fill out. You pre-fill out a lot of the stuff. They just kind of enter it, cover 3 or 4 issues that might be unique to you, and then button it up, and everybody signs it. A statutory will is on pre-printed forms, and my last will that I did was a statutory will. Statutory wills work very well for individuals who have a very simple situation. Even if you have kids, even if you have a significant amount of assets, statutory wills work well. A couple things on statutory wills. One, don't go into the bargain bin of a 3-year-old computer program and buy a 3-year-old computer program for $10. There's a very good chance there's been lots of law changes. You might go through that entire process, and that will might be void because of something that was done within it or not done within it because there's been law changes. So buy the current one and make sure that it's stated that it works well for California. What some people like to do is you'll do your own statutory will, you'll write it up, you'll have everything done, and then maybe you go to an attorney and say, hey, here's my statutory will, are there any errors in there? And maybe the attorney will charge you $150 for an hour of their time to oversee it and overlook it and say it all looks good, or you know what, you might elaborate on this, or you might elaborate on that issue. Now, when you figure out your will, you're going to appoint an executor. An executor is the individual who is going to oversee all your assets and the distribution of all your assets. You do not want to automatically make your children the executor or your parents the executor. They may or may not have that skill. The best person for that might be an uncle. It might be a best friend of yours. The other thing I would say, if you're going to appoint someone executor of your will, ask them if they want to be executor. Especially if they know what they're doing, they know what they're getting into. A lot of people also, because being executor is stressful, you can be sued, there's tons of paperwork, it's a lot of work. And so you might put in your will a $10,000 gift to the executor. Or you could also state within your will how much per hour the executor is going to get paid. So if the executor is getting paid $30 an hour for all the work that they do, or something like that. So that if there's lots and lots of challenges and they have to go to court and back and forth, at least that person's getting paid to go forth and try to execute your wishes. All right. So that's the end of this chapter, and hope you have a great day.